Hello and welcome to your St. John Narana Midweek message for this week. We're launching into our discussion of the commandments. 10 commandments? Why 10? Good question. Much of what we think about this passage and about these teachings actually doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from the famous movie with Charlton Heston, The 10 Commandments. Really, it's a whole lot more complicated than that. So if you take a look at your Bible and open it to Exodus, that's where all the story is. And it's in chapter 19 that on the third new moon after the Israelites had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai and they arrived at the foot of the mountain of God. Now, it's not simple like in the movie where Moses goes up on the mountain, gets the tablets and comes down angry and then goes back up again. No, it's way more messy and complicated than that. And there's not a list of 10. So the people are consecrated in chapter 19 and brought to the foot of the mountain, and God calls Moses up on the mountain and then sends him back down again to tell the people, don't come up on the mountain. And Moses says, the people are already not supposed to come up on the mountain. God says, go down, get Aaron, remind the people not to come up on the mountain. So he does. And they go back up on the mountain. But before they go back up on the mountain, God speaks to the people of Israel gathered at the foot of the mountain and says these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Chapter 20 then lists what we commonly know as the 10 Commandments. And it goes through to verse 17. That's where the list is. Then all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. They were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance and said to Moses, you speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come only to test you and put the fear of him upon you, so that you do not sin. Then the people stood at a distance while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. And Moses goes back up on the mountain and receives the laws of God. And there's a lot of them. There are laws concerning slaves, how to conduct their trading in slaves, and the way they are to treat Israelites who are slaves, the way they are to treat men and women who are Israelite slaves, and the way they are to treat slaves who are not from the house of Israel. And it's all different. It's a whole mess of laws about slavery. There's no banning of slavery, by the way. It is just assumed. And then there's a series of laws concerning murder, a series of laws about non-capital offenses, about stealing and such. Then there's laws about property rights in chapter 22 and crimes punishable by death. You must not permit a sorcerer to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. A whole lot of laws. And not just laws, but duties and expectations. Chapter 23 has ethical instructions and then laws about festivals and holidays. And concludes with a series of final commands before chapter 24 has God's covenant sealed with the people of Israel. God says to Moses, who's gone back down after delivering all of these laws, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship at a distance. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, and the others shall not come near, and the people will not come up with them. So they have this worship service, and the peoples have a vision of God, the leaders of the people. And they had this big meal, and a sacrifice, and a worship. And then, finally, at the end of chapter 24, Moses goes up on the mountain and spends the 40 days and 40 nights. He's given laws about the offering for the tabernacle, for the building of the ark, the table, the lampstand, all the fittings of the tabernacle of worship, which was later then translated to the temple. There's laws about the curtain and instructions for building the altar, and the courts of the tabernacle, which then gets later translated to the courts of the temple. And then there's how to make the oil for the lamp, and how to make all the clothing for the priests. And then the ordination rituals for the priests. There's instructions for sin offerings, burnt offerings, offerings for the ordinations of the priests. And then there's instructions about how to build the altar of burnt offering, the altar of incense. There's instructions for the offerings of the tabernacle and the wash basins and all of the rituals of the temple and the incense to be used in the temple. And then there's regulations in chapter 31 for the appointment of the workers. And then more laws about how to observe the Sabbath. After all of this, then we are told that God gives Moses the 2 tablets of stone, and Moses comes down. How much are on those 2 tablets of stone? There's been a lot of laws given, and a lot of instructions, and a lot of rules. They might be large pieces of stone by the time all of that 10 chapters is written down. But Moses comes down and finds the people worshiping the golden calf. And things get rough. So, the 10 Commandments, it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, but we will just deal with that first passage as we go into the details of that. But know that there are many laws covered in this story. Many rules and regulations for how the people of Israel were to worship, and the construction of their worship space. And over, Sabbath is emphasized. More next time.